Let's go back to my question, how you all stand on the recovery plan, and talk to each other about it. What do we got 5 minutes. We can negotiate a deal right here. But I mean, do you favor this plan, Senator Obama, and you, Senator McCain? Are you in favor of this plan?
We haven't seen the language yet, and I do think that there's constructive work being done out there. So for the viewers who are watching, I am optimistic about the capacity of us to come together with a plan. The question I think that we have to ask ourselves is, how did we get into this situation in the first place? 2 years ago, I warned that because of the subprime lending mess, because of the lax regulation, that we were potentially going to have a problem, and tried to stop some of the abuses and mortgages that were taking place at the time. Last year, I wrote to the Secretary of the Treasury to make sure that he understood the magnitude of this problem and to call on him to bring all the stakeholders together to try to deal with it. So the question I think that we've got to ask ourselves is, yes, we've got to solve this problem short term, and we are going to have to intervene. There's no doubt about that. But we're also going to have to look at how is it that we shredded so many regulations. We did not set up a 21st century regulatory framework to deal with these problems, and that in part has to do with an economic philosophy that says that regulation is always bad.
Are you going to vote for the plan, Senator McCain?
I hope so, and I
as the United States Senator,
sure.
You're going to vote for the plan?
Sure, but let me point out, I also warned about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and warned about corporate greed and excess and CEO pay and all that. A lot of us saw this train wreck coming. But there's also the issue of responsibility. You've mentioned President Dwight David Eisenhower. President Eisenhower, on the night before the Normandy invasion, went into his room and he wrote out 2 letters. One of them was a letter congratulating the great members of the military and allies that had conducted and succeeded in the greatest invasion in history, still to this day and forever. And he wrote out another letter, and that was a letter of resignation from the United States Army for the failure of the landings at Normandy. Somehow, we've lost that accountability. I've been heavily criticized because I called for the resignation of the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. We've got to start also holding people accountable, and we've got to reward people who succeed. But somehow in Washington today, and I'm afraid on Wall Street, greed is rewarded, excess is rewarded, and corruption, or certainly a failure to carry out our responsibility, is rewarded. As President of the United States, people are going to be held accountable in my administration, and I promise you that'll happen.
Do you have something directly to...
Some pause. I also think there's another statistic that's important here. If you and I had been sitting here 5 years ago and said we're going to spend more money on interest on the national debt than on defense next year, you thought I was crazy. The fact is we are, because we've run at such a huge deficit that we're going to spend more money on paying the interest on the national debt. And that's just disgraceful. And that's why we got to have a line item veto, a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, and a couple other things, because the system is broken, as you know.
Explain why we need a line item veto now. Why we didn't used to have to need a line item veto. What has changed that now? I
think the thing that's changed, Doug, is a tremendous increase in pork barreling. I'll never forget when President Reagan had a 10-pound appropriations bill that he spoke of at his State of the Union message a few years ago. No one had ever read or seen, and it was for hundreds of billions of dollars. And crammed into that is all kinds of unnecessary and wasteful spending. Some of it is funny. We're going to spend $2.5 million next year to study the influence on the ozone layer of flatulence in cows. But others, such as $1.2 billion to refurbish an aircraft carrier in a shipyard that's supposed to be closed, is rather alarming. So we've got to have it. Otherwise, I don't see how we're going to get the deficit problem under control. And I think it would inevitably lead us into a depression unless we get it under control. We cannot continue to spend in this fashion.